First off, welcome to Spotlight. Welcome to the new CISO podcast as well. This particular event is the 2021 Cybersecurity Predictions. I am Steve Moore, Chief Security Strategist. This is a show of a couple different firsts. This is our first video podcast. We have not yet done that. This is our first, I guess, live, meaning broadcast live podcast. Of course, they're all live at some point. It's also the first time we've had three CISOs on that have all been prior guests. With that in mind, each of them, we spend about an hour with each of them to kind of get to know them. So we won't be doing at-length introductions because we only have an hour of our time today. For those listening in the future and for those here today, I'd like to have each guest briefly introduce themselves. First, we have Deneen from United. Deneen, welcome, and would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm Deneen DeFiore. I'm the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at United Airlines. I've been with them just under, I think, about 10 months now. So prior to that, I had various different CISO roles at GE and GE Aviation in particular.
Thank you, Deneen, and welcome. Colin, if you would please. Colin's from Levi's. Would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes, Colin Anderson, Chief Information Security Officer at Levi Strauss. Been in the role now a little over 5 years. Prior to that, I had a similar role, CISO role over at Safeway for many years before that. So thank you. Looking forward to the podcast.
Thank you, Colin. Welcome. Charlie, if you would. Charlie's from Expedia. Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, Charlie McNerney. I'm the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer with Expedia Group. Been with Expedia for a year, but prior to that, I was 25 years with Microsoft in a variety of CISO roles as well as operations, et cetera. So been around.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome. Again, this is 2021 cybersecurity predictions. But part of looking forward is understanding current circumstance. And for all of us, that circumstance began to change a bit around March, probably. And in a earlier conversation that I had with each of our esteemed guests, they initially began with kind of a theme around hard decisions and simplification and having to rationalize spend and even reprioritize the order of some of their existing work. And so, as part of that sort of making these decisions and looking to simplify, I want to start, if I could, with you, Deneen, and maybe give us a look into what was it like for you and your organization, not only as a new CISO, but having this change happen. So, kind of maybe laying the baseline for us, both in the work that you had to do and then the events that we've had, and what was that like as the foundation, so we can look forward into the future.
Sure. Yeah, it was a interesting, I say, onboarding to United Airlines. Was there for a month and a half, and as you mentioned, the world kind of changed in March, right? And I don't think it's anybody's surprise. The aviation and airline industry, among many others, was hit very, very hard by this. A month and a half in, we are trying to figure out, is the company going to be able to, make it? Versus all the grand plans that I had to be this new CISO that would come in and kind of take things to the next level for United Airlines. So what we really had to do was kind of focus in on what the priorities were, aligned to the business risks and outcomes. At the same time that we were trying to figure out what we needed to do from a business action, of course, cyber criminals, threat actors take advantage of a crisis, right? So the threats and events and kind of activity around that was going up. So it was a really interesting time to be able to balance. Okay, we're in a downturn. We have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep the business solvent and watch what we're doing when an increase in activity and protection that's needed as people transition from the office to home was happening at the same time. So it really took a lot of laser focus on what are the risks, what's the most bang for our buck, and where do we put, the resources to make sure that we're protecting the business. Because the last things that a business needs in an economic or a pandemic crisis, right, is to be hit by something from a cyber perspective.
You also shared something that I think is valuable insight that, and maybe even for some of the people earlier in their career, if they're listening. I was prone to this earlier in my career where I was very technology or very tool focused. That was a priority. It was even part of my identity. I'm a this specialist, and it's very, and you align with various tech. Could you spend maybe a moment on that and how that added some challenge, or did it or did it not add an issue? You spoke and shared with that.
At United, the strategy was to build a really capable foundational portfolio of security technology. It was an accelerated fashion over the past couple of years. And that's great to put in place. But what was happening, especially in the crisis, a couple of things, right? A lot of the implementations were midstream. We weren't fully getting all the value out of the tools that, in the future, we said, hey, here's the future state. This is where we want to be. But we were, at the very beginning of an implementation, or we weren't even implementing where we needed to be, right? So not the optimization and value wasn't there from the portfolio. Then you add on the fact that, we are in an industry that's hit. There's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, doubt, right, by the employees. There are incentives for employees to actually voluntarily separate from the company, right? Even though cybersecurity is still a top priority for United, there was a lot of attrition. And I'm just going to be very transparent with everybody for whatever reasons. So we had to, again, take a step back and say, okay, what technology is going to help us protect the business, put a lot of things on hold, right? And really, again, laser focus on getting the most bang for our buck, aligning that technology that's to solving the business problems or the risk mitigation that we had to put in place. So the great things that we wanted to do on the roadmap kind of had to be reshuffled, and we will eventually get there. But now it's like, let's do one thing with this tool 100% and be assured that it's going to work and protect the business versus, spreading ourselves thin across multiple initiatives in a time where this is cyber risk is elevated and we need to be on top of things.
Certainly, thank you. That helps sort of set the stage. Charlie, you mentioned kind of a re-examining of tools as well, and despite budget isn't going up and you're reevaluating. Talk to us about that if you would, kind of set your stage for us.
That's where I think Deneen and I share so much because we're both in a segment called travel. And so, there's a couple outages to that. For us, when that hits you, it wasn't even gradual, it was sudden. So there is no planning for suddenly. And I think from that standpoint, you tend up trying to figure out how to react. And for us, it wasn't, there was a bunch of things in play. There's the digital aspect of the job, and then there's the physical aspect of the job, and that we have employees that are in facilities that can no longer be there. There's the remote nature of work. You can have plans for disasters, but it was interesting to figure out, do we all have plans for pandemics? Now that we're in one, it is taxing from a digital and physical perspective. So for us, it was just not only taking care of our employees, but what Deneen and I can share is, how do you take care of all the travelers? And are your technologies set up when you don't necessarily think about how much self-care you have for your systems? And I can think through how fast our product teams made changes to existing applications so that we could get systems that were somewhat, archaic. Customers could end up self-selecting and canceling their own trips without having to call. Because you can imagine what our wait times were like. They were hours. And you've got everybody built up because you're trying to get your travelers home for a variety of reasons. You're learning every policy for an airline, you're learning every policy for a cruise ship, a train, plane, zoo ticket, you name it. In addition to that, you're also wanting to make sure that your employees are remote, they're connected, they're healthy, their connections are healthy, and all of the systems that we're interacting with customers are safe and secure and private. So your plans go out the window. Then it's new plans. And how fast can you make sure that while your developer teams are making all of these changes, because you want that to happen, but that you're also managing your risk profile, that security is inherently built within the apps that they're changing. Is there a mechanism that you can ramp up on that allows them to get these changes faster, more secure? And I could tell you, it took us a while to catch up. It was easier to make sure that these customers were taken care of and have to lag behind our developer teams to make sure that what they did code was safe. What we did prop and the way we propped it was safe. We all got caught up, but I think it's that notion that, when things happen to you, I said it before, you can, it doesn't matter. Things are going to happen every day. And now we have the beauty of all of these changes. And yet I'm going to have the same thing happen when we can get through this pandemic and suddenly everybody wants out of their house. And I'm super excited for that day. I know Deneen's super excited for that day. So part of this is what I call the perspiration to get it shut down. But now there's the aspiration to turn it all back on. And that's what I'm hoping all of this planning and some of these tough decisions, hopefully, were well worth the opportunity to transform your posture.
That'll be an exciting time, and I think we all look forward to that, myself included. Thank you for that. Colin, you mentioned some turmoil on revenue, but you also shared something that I completely agree with, that challenges force innovation was the statement that you've made. Tell us about your situation to kind of set the stage before we go looking into sort of the prediction in the future of 2021.
This pandemic, you can look at it as an opportunity as well as a challenge. I think that's how the organization embraced it. This was it. Obviously, the business was challenged. Revenue dramatically declined, but we all felt that we could innovate and come out of this stronger, be a healthier, stronger company, take market share. And so IT and information security were front and center, both for supporting our remote workforce around the world, but also helping transform our business and come out of the pandemic stronger. And so the last 6 months have just been a blur. Largely, it's been one technology project, where we're working to bake in security, after the next. It's been a marathon with a lot of sprints in between. And it's been a challenging year because the business is impacted, no question about it. Our revenue is significantly down, but we are continuing to invest because we think we can actually come out of this stronger and recover faster rather than, really dramatically cutting. We actually, certain areas of our business, certainly our consumer facing businesses, we're doubling down, making increased investments to come out of this stronger. So it's forced us to drive a lot of change in a very short period of time. A lot of people have talked about you were doing 2 years of change in a 6-month period, and it's very true. That speed is exciting, the change is challenging, but these are the fun problems to solve. And it's been a challenging year, but an exciting one too.
Spoke with a CISO yesterday that is in charge of a casino, and he noted that the one benefit of this is that they got to shut everything down, so they were able to do all the really disruptive and nasty work that they would have been yelled at for doing before. That everything was off, so it didn't matter. That's kind of a bittersweet success, but he was very happy that they were able to sort of do that because it's unprecedented. It had never happened before,
Yeah.
like ever, had they shut down the data centers. I find that interesting. I want to come back to you a little later because you have this sort of perspective on hard decisions being difficult for security professionals, especially as it relates to making choices on what to do and what not to do. But I want to flip into a little bit of a different topic first, if that's okay. I want to get into looking into 2021 in terms of what's new, because a lot of times if I ask a CISO about a prediction, maybe a year or two ago, it's more this optimistic kind of thing, or this, and not to say we can't be optimistic now, but it's with a different lens. It's saying, well, I think, or I plan to adopt, or it can be a little more harder leaning. Whereas now, setting the stage that we have, the big event might be just operating as we did before. Maybe there's this wonderful sort of surge that we're expecting where, hey, there's vaccines that people are comfortable with, and everyone wants to travel, and everyone's ready to, the consumer confidence is ultra high, and we're ready to shop and do all these things. So I want to go back, if I could, to Deneen. With this recovery that we expect to see and hope to see, you mentioned back into securing business outcomes. What do you think into 2021? What are you focused on now going into next year? What are the things that you want to knock out of the park?
We're doing a lot of things to enable the business, and because the business model is changing, right? We have to interact with customers differently. So when you think about health and physical safety being at the top of the list, right? Contactless interactions with travelers. So we're looking at things around how do you do your own bag tag printing, where that's already available at United, right? More digital interactions and transactions for our customers online. Biometrics, right? Before that was a neat technology looking for a problem to solve. Now it's a priority. It's a necessity for authentication throughout your travel experience, right? The other change that's happening, right, is because of the focus on health safety. There's more health data that we need to collect to allow people to fly safely or enter countries safely, and things like that. All that dependency on digital automation and changing the way we work, because we wouldn't have done those things before, puts digital risk management in the forefront, right? There's emerging risks that we didn't have to deal with. Now we do. So it's not just only us, it's around all the third parties that we interact with, because we're not doing this alone. We have to be able to, make sure that we are securing that whole experience. So we are really focused on making sure that we have the security model that enables the business from that customer experience. And then as we interact with all of our partners, that it's cohesive and pervasive throughout that experience. So that's exciting, because that's going to be a game changer for a recovery, to get the confidence in the customer based on how safe you feel, not just from a physical perspective, but also from a cyber and data protection perspective.
Deneen, maybe you could spend a second on something you brought up related to biometric authentication and facial recognition, and to the degree you can share. I think that many organizations, it would have been a nice to have, or maybe something that happened in the think tank, the people that get to experiment and play during the day would look into. But now it might be one of these outcomes that are necessary for safe travel. You may decide that, or other people smarter than me may decide that. That was something that was a nice to have, and now might be a critical, and it may also affect, from a business perspective, the ease of which we interact with one another and
Yeah,
travel and visit the airport and breeze through, right? I mean,
that's right.
there's many exciting downstream implications. So talk about that looking into 2021, if you would.
Yeah, it is becoming the biometrics, in different types of forms are becoming necessary form of technology to get through the travel experience. So everything from, I'm sure people are familiar with Clear, right? That was only used really at the TSA lines. You need to be authenticated, right? Is it the experience at when you enter the club, right? So you don't have to interact with it with a customer service agent, or is it as you board the plane? Some of those pilots were going on and things like that, right? So there's multiple touch points where we're trying to figure out where that fits and makes sense, and how it, customers can feel confident that they are authenticated and safe, and it's easy as well too.
Now, I'm excited to see that. I spend a lot of time on your airplanes,
Great.
and so I'm excited to see that, and sometimes in your club too. Colin, you mentioned earlier that you made more changes in the last 6 months than you had in maybe in the prior 2 years, and funny enough, that's typically the kind of enthusiasm that comes with breach response. Usually, you're requested to do about 2 or 3 years worth of maturity or cleanup in about 6 months. So you've kind of had, I mean, that's been sort of a synthetic, breach response in a way. Tell me about that and your focus on, as you mentioned in an earlier conversation, where the puck is going. What do you see?
Your MGM story or your casino story, we had the same opportunity with our stores closed for a period of time to do a lot of that hard maintenance, software upgrades and other things that allowed us to move forward capabilities that we wanted to roll out to our stores, but we couldn't because they were so disruptive. When you make these massive changes that can impact your business, you don't want to take these outages. But when the store is closed, we were able to push forward these capabilities that we've been talking about for a great deal of time. We rolled out other new remote access solution. We are kind of in the transition between one solution and another solution. And all of a sudden, when you're 10% of your workforce was remote and it goes to 100% over a weekend, that speeding up that rollout was, a priority to secure our employees regardless of where they're working. So these were some of the massive changes that we were able to make in a very, very short period of time. And basically every part of the security function, had to really focus. I mean, I think focus is more than anything else. Security, there's always lots of distractions. It's a target-rich environment. There's always things that you can work on and do better. But we really had to focus on what was most critical to our business. What types of attacks we were seeing, what do we need to defend against? Because we've all seen that dramatic increase in 2020 in terms of the attack volume and even some new tools and techniques that we're seeing attackers use. But we had to have focus. And I think as a leader, that's one of the most important things you need to help drive for your team is, what are we going to focus on and what are we not? Because you have to make those hard choices. You can't do it all. When I think back on 2020, it's been a lot about focusing on what's most important to the business, focusing on key things like protecting our employees, because they are still the top target. That's the easiest way into an enterprise is through the employees. So the more we can protect them, the more we can protect our enterprise. So that's kind of been some of the areas that we focused on.
You mentioned some shifts in budget that I think are interesting, and maybe for the benefit of the listener, this could be just something that you're seeing in general, or you could share if you care to the shift you've seen in your own. But in general, you shared with me kind of a shift that you're seeing more focus on security, digital, and product, where it was maybe a 70-30, and now you're seeing a change. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you think that's happened?
As an organization, we're taking a very product focused approach to our business. And so historically, the security budget was largely focused on enterprise security. And then there was a small carve out for product security. And that's kind of been flipped. As we start really much more focusing on products, the bulk of my budget is really more tied to product, security efforts as opposed to enterprise security efforts. So when I look back into 2018, 2019, it was probably 20 to 30% product security and 70 to 80% enterprise. And that's kind of flipped where now it's over 50% of the budget is focused on product security and a little less than 50% is focused on enterprise security. And it's just a rebalance of your focus and where you're making your investments. Long term, I think it's the right focus for a consumer-facing organization, because it is about protecting that consumer, protecting that trust, making sure that whether it's a traveler or someone coming into your store, that consumer can trust you as an enterprise, can trust their information with you. I like the focus that we're taking, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me, especially for a consumer-facing business.
Perfect. No, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for the listener, for everyone involved to see, maybe it's not as apparent to them, or maybe they haven't gotten that insight. Maybe they're newer in their career and have never seen this of where is the dollar being spent, where are organizations moving their investment and their time. Your priorities are where you spend your time. That's kind of the formula that I have. And we're seeing new sets of priority, which may change, influence the way we build our security teams, the way we manage our time in that regard. So thank you. I'd like to go, Charlie, to you. You spent a fair amount of time talking to me about slowing down a little bit and looking into better standards, hygiene, simplification. With all of that, what are you seeing or what are you working on in 2021 going into this next year?
From my standpoint, it's not unlike Deneen's comment. We're spending a greater amount of time on how do we think through this notion of universal participation in the sense that today our third parties can be as challenging as first party, meaning we have had notifications by hoteliers, airlines, cruises with respect to compromise of data that happens to come from our bookings and is stored on their systems. Now, it's not an impact directly to me, but it is associated to us because our customer base will say, well, wait a minute, I booked that with Expedia. How did that happen to extend itself from a cruise line? We do have to think through the notion of how far participation extends when it comes to common data. And how do we think about, this isn't about an arm's length anymore. It's about extending our security protocols and expectation around trust and integrity to third parties. And then we got to worry about that fourth channel Deneen talks about. And that's where, companies will extend that to find another booking company that helps facilitate the transactions. And therefore, now your data is extended even further. Kind of this tracking and trying to understand what these journeys are and having a really good line of sight with respect to how the transaction flows and where you can get involved and how far can your security expectations go, where can you hold folks accountable, and where do you worry about it, and how do you educate people about how they need to think about that. Because I find that a lot of companies are really focused in on this attestation or certification mechanism around SOC 2 or ISO, and you see it. And I think companies can have great security postures, but in this area where we need to protect each other, it can only come from our ability to communicate and associate what that cares and data standard looks like together so that we don't have things flowing around because our reputational impacts are the same. Yeah, I can understand where a hotelier may have been compromised, but to my customer, it looks like me. That's the part where we've got to get better. So, what does a PCI light or a security policy light look like when it gets the further away from your company? So now we see partners are demanding a little bit more around how do we know we can trust each other? Yeah, we've had good security programs, but can I trust you? I'm passing, incredible amounts of public and customer data, credit card information, et cetera. How do we extend it to know that the people that we connect with are in fact as solid or are thinking about that as much as we are? So I think we're going to spend time there. I think it's important for us to get a sense of what our journeys are. And so I'm going to spend a lot more time on thinking through, our attackers are not always human. And so we got to start thinking through, just how fast they are. This notion of time to live using graphical tools to get on a network that's not segmented really just points to your crown jewels a little bit faster than you thought. So you got to spend a little bit more time up front thinking through these different journeys. So how do you think about our traveler journey, our developer journey, our employee journey, and make sure that we're beginning to think about where risk and trust is starting to get baked into each aspect of that journey. So now it just means we got to involve everybody. And how we do that with travelers, we got to think, we're talking through what does multi-factor auth look like for a traveler where not only is it your financial data, but now it looks like encrypting your passport data and your family's data is kind of important. So Do we ask travelers to take a more active role in owning their data, very much like healthcare data, financial data, and say, hey, are you willing to be more involved in that? Because we know that if they're involved, we mitigate fraud, and fraud is terrible for businesses like Deneen and Collins and ours. I mean, that's a payout. That's an attacker that was not just getting the company, but they were getting their customer. So I think that those are the things that we'll look to. Back to the how far do we extend these mitigations and trust factors to it. So that's where we're going to spend our time.
For those that are listening, we spend a little bit of time chatting before the show to kind of get an idea of what we're going to cover. It's just kind of an outline, but with each of them, I'll share that, and especially with you, Charlie, I take notes even as you're speaking. So we even covered some of this stuff. This isn't scripted at all, but I always find myself taking notes. I have extra pages of notes from each of you because you use even different ways to describe these problems and different concepts that are good for those of us that have to educate and communicate. So I appreciate not only the answer, but how you gave it. Even this concept of everyone talks about third party risk, but you introduced it as this idea of universal participation. And what does that mean? So thank you. I have a follow on question. You spoke about attestation and what that is, and that's typically a legal or a contract type of thing in third party risk. Do you see organizations, or has your organization spent time to maybe put a procedural or technical control in place that reinforces this sort of something that would have been a legal document in the past? So thinking about risk, thinking about how you authenticate to one another, thinking about how you exchange information. Is there anything that you're looking into 2021 that you're thinking about there? And then I want to go kind of in reverse order and ask Deneen and Colin the same.
So, from my standpoint, the answer is we are basically doing today data flows between all of our systems, both in and out, to determine if we can do a better job with respect to contractualizing, right of audit, those types of things. Enforcement is super difficult. It's easier in the first, second party phase. It gets a little harder when I'm relying on, it's just like, well, here, I'm going to tell American Express what to do. Probably not. Now, they're going to tell me what to do from the standpoint that they're my credit card provider and et cetera. They're one of them. So you sit back and think, okay, well, but in that world, if we're able to see each other, meet each other, and kind of look at the opportunities we have together, then I think it gets better. Yeah, we have standards between where we store data, who has access to the data. We can validate all of that. It's the when it's further away. That's where we have to figure out, is there an arm's length opportunity that we don't know about or that we can somehow enforce? I don't know. We'll go as far as, I have no legal budget. I'll go as far as the dollar that I have to spend on the problem, but we do have the problem to deal with.
I appreciate the candor and the perspective. Deneen, anything that your organization, if we agreed that this universal participation is important, and I think we all do, and even with a difficult time and probably cut resources, are you working on anything, or do you think organizations should work on going beyond just better contracts and better sort of audit? And if so, what might be a suggestion you have?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One of the big initiatives we have is around, kind of the third party risk management. But first, it starts with us. We need to make sure that we have a dynamic view of our controls at any point in time, right? I really am trying to push everybody away from that static point in a time assessment, right? Yes, great, we passed the PCI assessment. Yes, great, we passed whatever assessment that was required by a customer or another regulatory agency. But that is a point in time, and we can't rest on those laurels. So we have to really move to a dynamic view of how our controls are operating at any point in time. So I want to be able to say, what does this look like? And pull up my dashboard, like in my, in my nirvana, right? And say, we're good. I'm confident we're good. Now it's going to take time to get there. And we have a plan around, how we're going to get there. But as far as, then you extend that out to the ecosystem, I think that's a concept that we want to do as well, too. Instead of saying, hey, fill out this questionnaire and tell me what your program looks like, really trying to take the next step to be more of a event driven type of program. So if the relationship changes with the supplier, if the data flow changes with a supplier or a partner or whatever, we are enacting the right reviews and or just discussions around what does that mean from the way we protect and interact together. Even if it's not a data exchange, if it is a dependency on a critical process or operation like a business process outsourcing. How are we, if the business relationship is changing or the way we're using that supplier, interact with that supplier, we have to change at least assess our security posture, right? And then we have to do a better job of integrating intelligence, from all different sources. If it's, in my case, the aviation ISAC or, other intelligence feeds to say what's going on in the ecosystem and what is our like our supplier and partner posture looks like. Do we have gaps based on what's happening over here because we don't want it to impact us? We have to do better at kind of in sourcing integrating that type of information to get where we want to be from that first posture. Future state vision is going to take a little bit of time to get there, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it now.
I like that approach. I have to be a little bit diplomatic, but in my past, one of the things that I was able to work on is downstream, so related to third party risk. If we saw either evidence of compromise of a third party's credential that was federated with us or had access with us, either based on behavior or evidence of compromise, and those are 2 points of view. I worked with legal to sever access, and that's a very, very grumpy, unpopular event when this occurs, as you could imagine. But it was effectively saying, if I have evidence that your environment is likely compromised, it would be imprudent for me to maintain that because I have no further control over what could have happened downstream, both
Yep.
technically, legally, and all the rest, right? And the only way, so speaking of attestation, this was added into the contracts moving forward, but they had to attest that they were in a known good state before we would re-enable. And sometimes this took a while. So this was a little clunky, but it was using the intelligence that you mentioned. Your comment made me think of that. It took some fighting to get that in place. So, but I do think that that's where we need to go in some form. Every company is different. Every appetite for risk is unique. But I think that being able to explore that with a legal team and a contract team and a sales team is important. Colin, anything that you would share?
You raise a very valid point. We do focus on our supply chain as well, and there's only so much you can assess, using the questionnaires or third-party tools, looking at public data. And we've had several partners this year be compromised, and we have cut off access. And it's challenging. The business understands it, though. We've had to do it enough times. Our legal team is very supportive. My executive team is very supportive because job one is protecting our enterprise and protecting our consumers. And so if we have a partner that's been compromised, you have to sever that risk until that partner can confirm to you that they have control of their systems. And again, they are in a known good state. Unfortunately, the reality is we all have hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers. And that risk is, if anything, growing. You can look at many major breaches, and oftentimes it comes through supplier's credential, supplier's network connection, whatever the case may be. So if we're not looking at that risk, we're ignoring a serious risk to each of our enterprises. And so it's something that we true focus on. And unfortunately, I only see that risk growing. The reality is weakest link, whatever you want to call it, you have to keep your eyes on that issue and especially know what access they have into your environment, what information you're sharing with them, because every partner has a different risk, a different impact to your enterprise. And we do kind of triage them, and we know which partners are probably our greatest risk because of the relationship. And then we have many partners that don't really present a tremendous business risk, and we don't put as much energy behind those. But we do definitely focus on the risk.
It's a very difficult thing because often access through some mechanism is given. Most of us haven't had the career opportunity to build a greenfield environment over
Very
which they're
true.
responsible. We inherit something of legacy flat network that we have to protect with who knows what split credentials and whatever else are out there. And then you enter in this scenario you paint with a risk and compromised credentials or compromised third parties. What does that mean? It's a daunting thing. So actually, Colin, I want to stay with you. I think one topic that would be interesting to the guests is from a risk perspective, from an attack perspective. I know things have changed, or at least most organizations have reported that they've seen increased activity. Maybe a prediction or an expectation to set in 2021. What are you expecting to see from an attack perspective?
We are in an API economy today. There is a tremendous amount of access and information being exchanged through APIs, and we are seeing a dramatic increase in attacks against those APIs that are being used by applications. I harken back to years ago when many organizations were moving into the cloud and they were learning how to secure data and systems in the cloud, and there was a learning curve there. I think we're going through that same learning curve with APIs right now, and we are learning as we go, making mistakes, catching them, fixing them. But I see a lot of attacks. I see attackers leveraging a lot of API vulnerabilities or configuration mistakes right now. I worry about asset proliferation. We're all dealing with a lot of IoT type devices, and that variety, the volume, many of them are you can actually flash or update very easily, and so they end up becoming a risk that you have to manage through segmentation or other controls. And so when I look out, in 2021, I'm worried about the API attack. I'm worried about asset proliferation. I do think that the solution, though, is talent, your people. At the end of the day, you can work to manage your process and kind of get control of your assets, but I cannot say enough good things about my team. This year's been a trial, and they've passed the test in flying colors. Talent solves so many problems. As leaders, I think my number one job is to remove the roadblocks. Help them be successful. Be a people multiplier. I mean, it's like a team. You might have one great player. That one player is not going to be successful without the team around them. And I have a fabulous team. I sing their praises every chance I get because I would not be able to do the job that I want to do for the organization without that team. So I see all these things coming at us, and I think the solution really is having the right people focused on the right problems, and you'll find the answer.
I dig it. And if we have time, I have a people section because you made a point to talk about that as well. So hopefully we have time to come back to that. But I appreciate the perspective on the attack side. Deneen, from looking into 2021, from the risks you see from attacks and the type of attacks, what are you expecting to see? I know we don't all have a crystal ball. Colin might have one, but based on what you've seen so far, what are you expecting going into 21?
Like Colin, I am concerned about APIs as well too, because they are, with more and more, I guess, transactions and data being digitized and functionality, right? Um, we're seeing that, right? And it's not always I'll say a detectable kind of issue, right? It's because the developer didn't return all the data on the back end, but only displayed what they need to on the front end, right? So it's designed as functioning, but how do you really look at that? So I totally agree with Colin. That's something that's been very, very top of mind for me. The other thing too is around just seeing a lot of, and this is not kind of sexy or fancy or anything like that, but really just being able to get, I'll say, the backlog of vulnerabilities, aged vulnerabilities, things that have been out there forever and ever that you're like, oh, well, that's been out there. It doesn't matter, right? Those fixed, right? Because we're seeing more and more attackers kind of switch and pivot to, hey, this has been out there. This is easy. I'm not going to put in a lot of time and effort to design a new kind of attack method or vector or tactic. I'm going to go out there and do what's easy for me, right? And I think we've gotten complacent a little bit in that, and we have to start to really take care of that tech debt and kind of remediate those vulnerabilities. Like, just, and maybe this is the time to do it because we have like we said, we have a little bit of a downtime from our business, and if we can't take, the systems aren't architected to do patching, and they still need 8 to 10 hours of downtime. Let's all go in there, because that's kind of the opportunistic way I see kind of some of the threats evolving, which again, not sexy and new or whatever, but it's just something that I've seen like
Y-
that more occurrences of.
Absolutely. So I think the other thing is if you're going through and cleaning house and trying to rationalize what you have through that exploration, the added time that you might have, you might find that some of that stuff could just be turned off and thrown away too.
That's right.
How many times in my career doing IR or we have had a running bet where how many systems we'd find during IR that should have been turned off and thrown away.
That's
And
right.
so you find that in every company. So yeah, that's another one maybe. Charlie, from your perspective, what are you from an attack perspective, or maybe from a threat perspective into 2021? What do you think we'll see?
Well, I'm gonna just not maybe just I think Deneen and Colin have it right. We're all in an API, speed world, which is really enabling our revenue streams to get super fast, get them digital, get them connected. And so I'm on that API front as well. To Deneen's point, the sheer amount of vulnerabilities that we have within existing systems, whether we think about desktop, server, cloud, most people who ran to the cloud did a non-native cloud built inherently in. They lifted and shifted old workloads and put them in a highly efficient container, and we call it really cool. No, those are not good workloads, and they're not very secure. But yes, I know that they're in the cloud, so good for you. But as much as I talk about universal expectation or participation, I also talk about expectation in the same way. I need to crowdsource my security emphasis as far through every person that I can connect with. It's not a central team to deal with fixing. I don't patch boxes, in other words, but I need the teams that do to understand how to think about it daily. Not when I tell you it's vulnerable. It's the amount of sheer notification. Can you at least understand that that's your system? That this is back to what your customer and what your integrity says. How do we get it patched versus just Charlie patch? Mine is to make sure that you want a healthy environment and you check for it and you know that it's tied to your customer throughput and you're doing a lot more on that area. So that as much as I can think about crowdsourcing the notion that this isn't just my practice, it's also yours, whether that's the developer journey, whether that's tailgating into a building when we talk about badges and someone says, oh, I don't want to turn around and ask somebody if that's their badge. And yet, for some facilities, you can have people walk in, steal notebooks, personal effects, and out they go. And we go, wait a minute, we really are asking you to be involved in the risk and trust posture of the company. And once you start doing that, you begin to start seeing it's a difference. In fact, I'll use an example for our chairman. Recently just comes to a facility, back to the physical aspect of badge, recently shows up and then is wanting to go through and try to figure out why his badge doesn't get through when the doors open. And so it was interesting for someone, and this is back to you wouldn't expect it. for an employee to tell around and turn the chairman, it's one badge, one swipe. And you're like, oh, that person's got it. Now, this is the chairman of your company. And that person says, just wait a second, it's one badge, one swipe. All of a sudden, you think when you hear that and it's not solicited, you go, somebody's participating, right? So you just think, wow, I'm just going to write that one thing down and go, I found one person today that's super excited about being involved in the risk profile of our company. So again, I just share those stories because this is what Colin does all day and Deneen and I do all day is we are just really trying to get as many people involved in our programs as we possibly can. So that's what I'm going to spend my time on and hopefully a resurgence in travel.
Kind of reminds me of the story when JFK visited the launch site many years ago before he went to the moon, and he stopped and asked the custodian to say, "What is it you do here, sir?" And he kind of stepped out of line, and we all probably know what I'm about to say, but he said rather than say I clean the floors, it's I'm helping put a person on the moon. And it's the same sort of thing. One of the things you mentioned, Charlie, is your mission goal is to be the world's best travel brand. And so I want to pivot on that and go back to you and talk a bit about people. I know Colin wants to chat about this. We're coming in on time, but you shared some advice with me getting people excited about the work, even in difficult times. Can you spend just a second on going into 2021 and a bit of leadership advice, if you could share on that?
It is all you have. And so you do have to make sure that you have them involved in what they want to do. They're working remotely. They don't see each other. I've got people on my team I haven't met yet physically, right? I've seen them. I've met them on an 11-inch screen. How do I get that connection? What I need folks to do is very much like your example, Steve, is I need them to know how much they're involved in basically the care of this company when it comes to every event we have, every vulnerability we fix, everything that we enable that flows revenue through the company and data through the company in a very trusted way. And to Colin's point, there's not enough of them. We all suffer from talent from the standpoint of just the amount of change we've all gone through with respect to people working on their own needs and finding new spots. But we also have to make sure that where our talent comes from in the future may not be as we have traditionally thought. These folks that have come through, they're all certified, they got their CISSPs and they're ready to go. No, we're actually there's not enough of them, and so we're taking a stance, and I'm taking a stance to grow from within. I'm finding incredibly passionate, technically oriented folks that I need to be involved in risk, and we're going to invest in them so that I have kind of a feed store to this notion of change, because I have to. There's just we all have security related roles open in our companies, and we're taking a long time to fill them. So I think I'm going to spend time investing there. But to Colin's point, it's the care and the feeding, it's the supporting, it's the hearing them out, it's connecting and making sure that we're not just remotely working in this digital field. It's how do you make that personal connection where you can, and you can't overwater that plant, is how I'll put it. As leaders, you just got to stay on top and you got to stay involved.
Thank you for that. I'd like to go to Deneen. You mentioned early on that going into this new position as a new CISO and fairly high level of attrition that's brought on by the pandemic, that we can all understand is extremely difficult. But I asked you a question. I'd like for you to explore that with us: is who left and who stayed? And you had a very specific sort of message around that centers on mission. Can you share that?
I have been in the aviation industry for half of my career, and it is really unique. It is from a cyber threat profile, you see pretty much everything. You see, the cyber crime. You see, motivated by financial. You see IP theft. You see on the aviation safety side, you see some things happening over there. It's just nation states, you name it, we have it, right? So it's just a very interesting dynamic environment. But when you think about like aviation, a lot of people they call them AV geeks, right? If you are on Twitter, it's hashtag AV geek, not like audiovisual, but aviation geek. And there's a draw to it, right? Because aviation, if you think about it, it has changed the world, right? It is responsible for connecting the economy, economic growth. You transport people for a purpose, right? And you get them there safely. So, and the technology behind it, not just the IT technology, but you think about it, like I even step back every time I see a new aircraft or even just one of the models that I like, and I'm like, wow, that's just amazing, right? So the people that want to be connected to the mission and keep growing and being, and doing good, right? And being part of that kind of innovation on and the future of flight, right? They're there and they're staying and they're helping secure that mission, which is great. When you have that connection to the business and the outcomes, the hard times, you can get through it. And it really does make you stronger, to kind of be creative and help us, from my perspective, be the best airline in the world. And I'm excited about that. Really excited.
That shows it comes through. It's an amazing leadership story to tell as well. One day, maybe you're sharing it with somebody, maybe a mentee or maybe another job interview, who knows, and say, "Let me tell you about the time I got a new job," and then the world stopped. Right? That's the gift in a very strange and maybe perverse way that you've been given. Right? And that's the opportunity as leaders that we each have. And thank you for sharing that perspective on mission. And I want to close on Colin. That was one of the things when we met to talk about this, he was adamant. Your position is we don't focus on them enough, and you alluded to this earlier. What would you share to a leader who wants to get better at that?
Empathy is key. Trying to stand out someone else's shoes is always a very important skill, but the human element will always be number one. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the people to deliver that strategy, it's just a piece of paper. I think a leader's number one job is to recruit the right talent, train and develop that talent, remove roadblocks to help them be successful, and be a people multiplier. I can only accomplish so much individually, but I can accomplish a tremendous amount through others. And so I get so excited when I see the success of my team solving major problems, figuring things out. The thing I enjoy most about my job is the people aspects. So as a leader, no matter where you are in your career, the soft skills are really important. The communication skills are really important. And always put people first. Everything else, it flows so much easier. The technology will solve itself if you've got the right people and the right talent. So I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. And thank you, Colin, Deneen, and Charlie, for your time. This has been fantastic. We started a couple minutes late. We went a couple minutes long, but it was so much worth it. Hopefully for the guests, it certainly was for me. This has been a live recording of the new CISO podcast for Spotlight 2021 Cybersecurity Predictions. Thank you again so much. That's it for this episode of the new CISO. Thank you for listening. Check out more episodes on exabeam.com/podcast. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe to get brand new episodes first.